Hello, my name's Joan Reid, and in this talk I'm going to cover some interesting sources that you can use to research a place. So I've titled the talk Researching a Place, Ancient, Modern and in Between, and for it I'm using a case study of a village in Escrick in North Yorkshire, which is somewhere I'm very familiar with because it's where I was born. So starting with ancient, I think one of the interesting things to think about in terms of a place is what's the oldest document you might be able to find. Now in Escrick's case, I've been quite lucky because it was in the Domesday Book, but you might find the place you're interested in doesn't have an entry in the Domesday Book, but there may well be an old document or old documents relating to the place which you could get access to either through a local museum or your county records office. So I think if you want to think about the extent to which your place has been in existence, starting with the ancient gives you a good place where you know something about what it was like at a particular point in time. So Domesday Book is really interesting because it was taken in 1086, and this extract for Escrick is shown on the right. The bit in the middle is actually mostly the transcription from it, and the source I used was a website called opendomesday.org. So it tells us that Escrick was a settlement in the hundred of Pocklington and the county of Yorkshire, and that it had a population which it recorded in 1086, which meant that it was one of the smallest 20% of settlements that were recorded. You can see that it was described as the land of Count Alan of Brittany, and how many households there were, something about the land and the resources, who the owners were. And then at the bottom there's some other information which mentions other places, which is also interesting to me because one of the places it mentions is Deaton, and I will come back to Deaton in a little bit. So I started with the ancient. I'm now moving to the modern, and one of the things that Escrick has managed to do is run a heritage project, which it started some time ago now. They have a website, and as you can see in the middle they talk about the first documentary evidence of Escrick was in Domesday, but later on there's some more information about the manors and how it worked, what the estates were, and so on their sort of early overview of the heritage page they're taking the history a little bit further forward. I know a bit about this site because some of my relatives still live in the village or nearby, and I myself have provided some information for it as well. So it's quite an interesting way of pulling together information about a place, and is definitely worth a little look if you were thinking longer term about doing something like that. So what about the in-between? Well, I'm going to introduce you to some resources which I find useful that come from the 19th century. And the first one is from the mid-19th century. It's Lewis's Topographical Directory. And this is an extract from his Directory of England. And in this just short piece about Escrick, you can get quite a lot from it already. It starts off by telling you that it's a parish in the wapentake of the Oosendorment. Now, the parish is St Helens, and a wapentake, if you've not come across that term before, is of Scandinavia. It's a term of Scandinavian origin, and it originally meant the taking of weapons, but actually it came to be more known for the clash of arms that people who were assembled in a local court might have done to express their assent to something they were being asked to agree to. So it's quite an interesting term. It does exist in other counties other than Yorkshire, but it's sort of probably a bit less known than the term 100. So wapentake and the term 100 both used to describe an administrative unit or division. And what's interesting, I think, when you're researching a place is getting an understanding of what different administrative units places went through. So here you can see on the top line it says the East Riding of Yorkshire. Well, at the time I was a child, Escrick was in the East Riding of Yorkshire, but then there were boundary changes brought in and it's now in North Yorkshire. And even though there have been some more changes since then, the initial boundary changes brought in Humberside, that no longer exists. Escrick stayed in North Yorkshire. So again, it can be quite useful to know if you're looking over quite a long time period, what administrative unions the place that you're interested were part of. And Escrick contains the township of Deaton. Deaton, as I say, is the village a bit further down, and Deaton also existed in the Domesday Book, which actually, until I started looking into this, I didn't know. So I was keen to learn new information. It tells you a bit more about where it is, that it's 6 miles south by east from York, and that it's on the Selby Road, and is one of the most picturesque in the county. The buildings, most of which are of recent date, having neat and tasteful gardens adjoining Escrick Hall, the property of Lord Wenlock. And an interesting bit of history. It was the seat of Sir Thomas Knivet, one of the gentlemen of the bedchamber to James I, who was sent with several others, November the 5th, 1605, to search the vaults under the House of the Lords, so at the time of the famous Gunpowder Plot. It also talks about the fact that the living is a rectory, valued in the King's books at £23, 3 shillings and 9 pence, and its patron is Lord Wenlock. If you're interested in what happened with the church and with the tithes, then it tells you that the tithes were commuted for land and corn rents in 1781. And the church is a handsome structure, built about 50 years ago by Bilby Thompson on the site of the former edifice. Well, interestingly enough, the church in Escrick isn't where it was originally built. And another source I'm going to introduce you to is the map collection that National Library of Scotland have. They have got copies of the Ordnance Survey maps, first edition and later, for the majority of the country. And you can see here, Escrick, you can see the word Escrick in the middle of the slide. If you look to the top above the big E and to the right, that's where the church is now. If you look lower down below where you can see the C on the slide, there's a number 6347. To the left of that is the site of the original church. And the story goes that the original church was moved because the current lord of the manor didn't want it so close to his house, so he moved it further away. It still remains St Helens, and it was rebuilt again in the Victorian times, so it's had quite a history really. But again, if you're interested in parochial history and churches, quite interesting also to look for things like that on maps and what have you, and also to look at a map and say, well, actually at this point in time this is what the place I'm interested in looked like. How does that compare to now? And the changes you can see can be quite significant. So the other one I'm going to mention that's a sort of 19th century and later one is hosted, it's called the Vision of Breton website, and it's hosted by the University of Portsmouth. And you can see here there's a slightly later Imperial Gazetteer written by Wilson around 1870, 1872. It also talks about Escrick and it being a township and how big its property is. And that it also contains the township of Deaton and part of Neighbour, which is another local village. And it gives you a little bit more about the living in the rectory, how much it's worth, the patron, etc. Now, you can actually, using this site, get lots more information from it. Once you've got to the place, you can then delve more deeply into the site. And it holds a lot of information taken from different census records, things like population, industry, housing, etc. And again, it's another good reason to know a little bit about which administrative unit your place has been in, because sometimes you have to sort of navigate the tables a little bit. But it's an interesting source of information that's definitely worth a look. So I've talked about a number of resources in this today, and I just wanted to give you a quick reminder of what they were. So the first one was Domesday Book. I found the information I looked for on opendomesday.org. The second was Lewis's Topographical Directory of England. Third, Ordnance Survey Maps. I've slipped in a new one, the Victoria County Histories. They don't exist for everywhere, but if they do exist, they're most definitely worth a good look. And the last site I just showed you was the Vision of Britain Through Time. I hope this talk gives you some ideas about where you might make a start looking for your particular place, and maybe you, as a result of it, will have a think about what's your own research objective, what do you want to find out, and maybe some of these resources will help you find some of that. Thank you for listening.